Tesla will be selling Optimus. Well, will they? Or will they keep them in-house? Will they rent them? Will they just keep them for themselves or not rent and sell them at all? And can they even afford to do that? I think we're going to have some conflicting opinions here because I got Jon Twigge with me, who wrote a fantastic post on X, which we are discussing. This is part 2. I'm Brian. Welcome to Futuraza. So in part 1, we had an opportunity to discuss the idea that maybe Tesla would sell them, maybe Tesla would rent them, or you suggested maybe Tesla won't sell or rent them. Just do all of the things inside the company and up the supply chain through the different suppliers that provide the things for the company, at least for the foreseeable future. Can they afford to do that?
Well, if we look at robotaxi, that goes even anywhere close to what they're talking about. That's going to produce so much profit. I think they can pretty much afford as many robots as they want. If we look at the money they've already got, which reminds me of conversations from certain analysts saying buybacks. Well, no, that $40 billion that they have in the, is it 30 now? I lost track.
It's 33-ish, 35-ish,
33.
somewhere around there.
$1 billion builds a lot of bots. It doesn't take long to build them, as we were talking about last time. They're much simpler than cars. If they only put 10% onto the market to rent, that would drive enough income to produce the next million. It doesn't take much for that cycle to be moving very quickly.
So I'm going to take the other side of this and say that 35 billion is not that much, because you need 5 to 7 billion before to maintain your credit rating. There is a death spiral you get into when your cash pile gets too low, where your suppliers start saying, maybe I'd like my cash up front instead of net 30 or net 90. That can become, so part of that buffer you need to take off. But it looks to me, and I could be wrong, that robotaxi and Optimus are going to be hitting the market around the same time. Certainly within, as of right now, it looks like within 6 months of each other, but really about effectively the same time. And if you want that 30 billion for robotaxis and for Optimus, then it's, the pile is much smaller. And we don't yet know, we certainly don't know what the price for Optimus would be. I assume starting out outrageously high, because that's what it's worth, and make hay while the sun shines. But we really don't know is what their cost is. And I agree with statements you made in part 1, where you said that the cost will drop quickly. But
you said robotaxi. I think you meant Cybercab.
I did mean Cybercab. Thank you.
Because of course we're going to have Teslas that are already out there on the street becoming robotaxis from later this year, perhaps, or at some point, which will already start to generate more income before they even need to build any of those cybercabs.
But they are building cybercabs. There will be cybercabs on the road as soon as the test fleet is out. That will be a big part of it, I'm confident. But what are we thinking a bot's going to cost? Because if a bot, let's say early bots are $30,000 to build, that's our cost, for example. That would mean you could only build 1 million of them before the cash pile is completely gone. And what do they rent for? Because like with a cybercab, if those cost, let's say, $25,000, and even if you're netting $1 a piece, $1 a mile, you need to run 25,000 miles before you get that initial investment back to deploy on the next one. So I'm of the mind that early models of both should be sold at 100 to 200% margins, so that for every one you sell, you get to keep 1 or 2.
Yes. The question is, do they sell them for cash? Who would be willing to buy them? Or do they keep nearly all of those for rent? It might be that the rent would come in fast enough off the first 50,000 that we might get next year to cover the next 50,000. Perhaps that gets us going to the point where the costs come down even further. The thing with all of these, I tend to avoid these kind of calculations because I know that the best people at doing these are already on the job. Mm-hmm. They've got a very tight control of costs, prices that they're selling and renting at. And I'm pretty sure they've got a big spreadsheet that tells them exactly how many they can build, how much profit they'll make. And of course, it's much easier for people to rent a bot. And we also know that there are people that earn $50 an hour more in certain factories, uh, maybe 80 or 100 in some places. And if one bot replaces three of them,
Yeah, let's start with the lowest paid employee there. Um,
mm,
even if you're, yeah, because there are 4 shifts in a week, 3 in a day, then the weekend. There's effectively 4 shifts a week. This bot can work all of them. It doesn't get sick. If you don't have anyone in loading and you need to pull someone from distribution or janitorial, you have to
mm,
train. No, they're already trained. Any bot can take any position. And if you've got
mm.
enough bots in the factory, if one of them has an issue, a truck pulls up and swaps it out. You're right back where you started. It's as good as new. It is new. Um, so what you would see is, starting with the lowest paid labor, even if you were to charge $1,000, $2,000 a month, if it can keep up with the slowest human in your factory, it's worth 3,000. So well, except that 2,000, yeah, I'd say it's worth at least 3,000 if it can keep up with your slowest,
And
least
I've heard a rumor that some bits of the US are more expensive to employ people than others.
fast.
I suspect we might start with the bots in California. They'll be much happier to pay those higher rates to start with until the prices come down. And that's just natural selection of the economy. Uh, where can we save the most money?
And that's what we've seen with manufacturing in China. It used to all be
Mm,
extremely labor intensive because the labor was so cheap, it didn't make sense to automate. And now, when you go into a factory that makes headlights, taillights, auto glass, you'll find that the head count is vastly lower than it was even 10, but certainly 20 years ago, because automation has gotten cheaper and labor has gotten more expensive. There is a point at which it crosses over and you just get better quality. Interestingly, US exports a ton of cotton to countries where labor costs are vastly lower and cotton grows. And the
mm,
reason US cotton is so desirable is because it's not full of finger grease and cigarette butts. Uh,
yes.
Humans are oily. I mean, we're mammals. I mean, we are, pretty gross when it comes to touching raw materials that will later need to be dyed. And that dye needs to adhere consistently. So automation can save you tremendously.
Yes. A little diversion into economics. Various people, it was probably Stephen Mark Ryan on one of his videos, said you've got to read Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell because people might take very simplistic views of, say, well, salaries are much lower in that country. But it's not just the salary that matters, it's the total cost. Uh, and it's the average cost per unit that really matters. And also, even countries specialize. So it can make sense to move goods around the world. And of course, the other thing that's going to change is we're not just going to see the change in labor and energy, which are all going to be massively cheaper. We're also going to feed that through with driverless cars and trucks into transport. Costs are collapsing everywhere. So it's going to be much easier to move goods around the world at really low prices across all things. It's completely mind blowing that it literally changes all different pieces of the economy. So why wouldn't Tesla use those benefits in their own supply chain first to get all the benefits, all the advantages, to get the economies of scale at a level that nobody else can that quickly? And it becomes really hard to imagine how other people catch up. We've seen rumors of Apple even doing a bot. Well, by 2028, where will Tesla be by then?
Mhm. And that's the trick. Boston Dynamics made a fantastic demonstration bot. Atlas was a wonder, a technological wonder, a marvel of modern engineering. It was, and it was perfect for its intended use, raising additional capital.
Yeah.
But beyond that use, not super helpful. When you watch the videos of it dancing, you'll notice everyone in the background looks bored. And that's because this is take 30. The first
Yes.
29 did not go quite as well. So
It
they,
was literally an academic exercise. Yeah.
yeah, well, I call it a fundraiser, but yeah,
Yeah.
it was never intended for mass production. If you tried to mass produce it, you would find that it's very expensive, very unreliable, and no one would buy it. And the people who do would hate it.
And even some of the other bot companies that are talking of trying to produce millions, they're talking of 50 and 80,000 for some of them. I know we've got differences in some of the Chinese bots, but if what they're saying about BYD and cars being subsidized, how real are those prices and how many can they produce?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are of the opinion that BYD is going to eat everyone's lunch. If it weren't for the strict protectionist policies in the US, BYD would already be the number one car company here. To which I say, yes, but BYD is permitted in Europe and other parts of the world, and it's not dominating there, because the fact that China has a low labor cost only helps to an extent, because the labor percentage of an automobile especially is very low. You reduce the bottom 5 or 10% of the car by half. Okay, that
I do have to say that I have seen some BYDs here in England recently. I think I'm up to 5 now that I've seen. I've seen 5 Teslas in a row on the road altogether.
Yes.
They're getting very, very popular.
I showed a chart recently that showed BYD sales growing double digits all around the world. But then when you look at the unit count, none of them were beyond, I think, 1,500 in total. So it's easy to grow by 400% if you only sold one car in the previous period. Wow, you sold 4. That's great. Like when GM increased their Hummer sales by 300% or 500%. Yeah, they literally sold 10. So
are they still making them? Have they given up?
They're still making the GMC Hummer. That's why GM is the largest EV maker in the world, is because they make the largest EV. Pretty sure that's how it works. Yeah,
they're into hundreds now, even, but it's not big numbers.
It's not big numbers. They've sold in total thousands. Low thousands.
And there will always be somebody that will want to buy the odd one. They've got lots of money. They don't care. They just want the biggest thing you can buy.
Yeah.
But that's not the mass market.
And something unique. I told my friend once, I bought an extremely rare album by Faith No More. And he said, really? Which one? I said, their newest. Nobody was buying it. It was terrible. So let's jump back over. What are we doing? So in the past, Elon had said that Optimus will break relationships between human labor and the size of the economy. When asked if it's design locked, he said that's kind of not a thing, but sufficiently locked to move forward. Tesla have the biggest possible ambitions, and it's going to take a truly vast machine like execution to build the machine that builds the machine. And I think that's where we're at in the discussion is, can anyone else build a factory with pocket change capable of tremendous volume? Because I think Tesla's in a unique position where we see them do things like add a kajillion GPUs, and it barely shows up on the financials because there's so much money pouring in. If Tesla were to build a $1 billion factory to spool up Optimus, that's 3% of their cash on hand. Do you see anyone else able to hold a candle to this?
Is it Figure that are working with BMW? One of the other robot companies?
I think it is Figure.
What they're doing, and to me, this just fundamentally undermines the proposition that they'll scale the factories, is that they're putting the robots onto the existing BMW line to do particular tasks a bit faster. But as we heard Elon say, they're not putting Optimus into existing processes. They're rebuilding the station and the lines for a complete unboxed process. We're talking about a revolution in manufacturing of the whole process. And everybody else is looking in terms of linear. Can we optimize by 10% here and there? It's a totally different proposition. It's a different world altogether. So no, some people will reach reasonable scale by huge effort. It's like, for example, the chargers, the superchargers. Tesla are now putting them on a plinth, dropping them in, and the cost is down to $40,000 or something crazy in places, and everybody else is paying 3 times as much to put them in. Once you've got that, there's then no profit. They charge higher prices and nobody goes to them.
Hmm.
It's a downward spiral before you even start. So yes, some people will put billions into building reasonably big factories, but they won't be profitable in the same way as Tesla's, which then means Tesla's got a mold for cookie cuttering to produce another 10 factories. And that's the scale that's needed to change the economy, to be talking hundreds of millions of bots in the next few years.
Hmm.
So, nobody else has quite got that in mind.
Hmm. And something we haven't seen from other manufacturers, I assume this is something they're thinking of. It doesn't take much to guess that Optimus will play a significant part in its own manufacture. Major reason that Tesla's building the train, Optimus, the station, the factory production machines, and laying the tracks, the full self doing, love it, is that overall machine must run like clockwork. And once it does, they'll be able to replicate it. And I would add to that, there's a problem in Nevada. It's hard to get workers there at Giga Nevada because not only is it in the quiet half of the state, not only is it in the biggest little city in the world, is what I think Reno calls itself. I pronounce city different than they do in terms of accuracy. I use more of an SH sounding city. And the problem is getting people to move to 20 miles outside of the biggest little shitty in the world is difficult because there's not a lot there. There's not a lot of things that would draw young, fun, family people. But Optimus doesn't need any of that. You could build the factory in Antarctica. It doesn't care. Thoughts on that?
We talked a little earlier about some countries having lower labor costs, specializing in different things. Optimus changes it all because they've got extremely low labor costs anywhere they like. And they can now make different decisions based on, we see in the first semi chargers going in. They can look at the transport routes, the distribution, and not be tied to the same factors as other people in terms of where are the factories, where are the people. Everything changes. It's just so difficult to imagine everything because energy's cheap, labor's cheap, the factories are cheaper. I think it's people give lists of jobs that Optimus will do. It's much easier to give a list of things that they won't do. It might be academic professors and really artistic certain things. But in terms of any job, that 22 degrees of freedom hand and Grok 4 and 5, we've had 3 in just coming out in the last few days. It's going to be a huge transformation of everything. And I cannot see there being many jobs that Optimus won't do.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to change the nature of labor for people because they're not worth much anymore. What do? Do they play? Do they do hobbies? Do they try and create creative businesses? Who pays for what? It's hard to imagine how this plays out other than Optimus will scale.
So I do have a video about universal basic income. There I said it. I will link that in the description. That is a discussion I hope we may be able to get to today. We will be recording one more of these where we will discuss how semi plays into this and how rethinking is required when it comes to all of these things, to semi, to Optimus, to Cybercab, to autonomy generally, and what this will mean to the world. I do want to thank Jon Twigge for hanging out. His post, his fantastic post, which spurred this whole discussion on X, in the description below. And everybody else, like, subscribe. Please subscribe. It really means a lot. And stay tuned, stay juicy, and I cannot wait to hear from you clever robots when we return in what may be the thrilling conclusion.
Thank you, Brian.